my business jumped hugely forward, and we were able to grow double in 1 year. We went from $1 million to $2 million in 1 year by hiring a office manager. And
Wow.
just to handle, paying the bills, recording the data, creating the charts. I could go
Yep.
in, 15 minutes, look at all the charts, understand where we were at, make a decision right on the fly, and go back to what I was doing, building the business from a floor side. So I'm over 3 plant managers, and they're really dealing with the day-to-day on the floor. Are we getting magnet tapes and films, those things out the door? Really what I'm looking at is what direction are we going next? Either by working with our engineers and maintenance guys to look at the level of our equipment, how old is it,
Yep.
where are we at in the life cycle of PLCs, do we need to upgrade? Taking a look at each one of our business segments and where is one lagging or growing, and understanding what resources we need to put towards those. It's really trying to have a vision of where we need to be in the next 3 years,
Right.
and what resources do we need to deploy to be able to do that.
It took a little bit of a non-traditional route. A lot of times we see, people moving from a big company and moving, into entrepreneurship. Henry's taking a little bit of an interim gap in the opposite direction. Owned his own manufacturing company, sold it for a couple $1,000,000, and was very successful in that realm. And now he is working for Magnum Magnetics, which is, I believe, the largest U.S. producer of soft magnetics for consumer markets. So welcome to Manufacturing Insiders, Henry. It's so great to have you here, and can't wait to hear some of the great information you have to share with us about, business analytics, just leadership, and, super excited to hear about kind of the interesting entrepreneurial path you've taken.
Yeah, thanks for having me on today. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So can you give me a little bit of background on the company that you owned and then sold?
Yeah, so Concept Manufacturing, I started it in 2017, and it was a rough road starting up. I started it with about $15,000 and just jumped out there. I'd read several things and that I was just kept putting it off and just decided to go. We started out with doing quality sorting. Was one of our first adventures getting into it, and always wanted to get over to the manufacturing side. Grew up in Tier 1 automotive for my manufacturing life, and so went through quality sorting, did some 3PL, and then got into doing labor-only manufacturing for Wooster Brush and Truck Labs.
Gotcha. What kind of manufacturing were you doing, with labor only?
So labor only is where the customer contracts us to send in their parts, their machines, and I had the space, the people, the management structure. We were ISO certified, and we would take their parts and machines, assemble them together, sometimes going direct out to customers and sometimes going back in as a sub-assembly in the case of Wooster Brush.
Gotcha. Okay. And how long did you run that?
5 years.
5 years. So what made you choose to kind of sell that business and then kind of get back into, the regular, form of employment?
Well, I looked out at the business model I had gotten into, and what I realized is we're doing about $2.5 million worth of business, but it was taking 43 people. So let's say $36,000 to $40,000 of sales per employee, and just not sustainable going out. And the only way to grow the business was to get more people, more space, because what people are sending out to you are things that they can't automate, take up a lot of space, long cycle times. And it was great to start up with, but realized I was in the wrong business model. And also looking out at the economics going on during this time frame, and the cost of money is very high right now. And the only other way to grow was to start buying a lot of machinery to grow that side. So I chose to punt. I had been dealing with a gentleman for a couple years. We had traded jobs back and forth, stuff that I could do that he couldn't, and vice versa. And he had asked a few times about the opportunity for purchasing the company, and just caught me on the right day at the right time, and we had that conversation, and we closed in 8 days. So it was pretty quick. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
So
incredibly fast.
yes, sir. Yep. So
So,
probably
so was
probably
he
took
one of
longer to
your
make the decision.
so was he one of your customers, and he just decided to kind of integrate your offering?
No, actually, we both provided quality sorting services,
Okay.
and you're pretty much in an area, and you usually make some good friends in that business lane. And if something was up in his area, I would pass it off to him, and if it was down in my area, he would pass it off to me. As items come up that was under his wheelhouse, because he had 4 companies going before he bought mine, buying them along as he grew. So if I found something in his wheelhouse with coatings or deburring, I would shift that over to him. So just good back and forth relationship.
Yep. So was it, we talked a little bit about your focus on business analytics and really understanding the manufacturing process, tracking all the details. Were some of those, things that you implemented a factor in his decision to purchase that business? Was that kind of the big value add there?
Yeah, absolutely. So coming out of the Johnson Controls and Toyota background, that's where I spent most of my career with Tier 1 Automotive, was with those two. Everything was analytics, everything was tracking. So when I started my own business, I kind of started a mom and pop shop with a big company mentality. So from the very beginning, we put in tracking, KPIs with throughput, quality, safety, tracked them every day, had a 9 o'clock meeting every day to go through those, whether it was with just the employees when it was me and a couple people. And then as I built out a management staff, our KPIs grew. We were down to where we could tell you how much sales per employee by the day. We could tell you what our largest volume of products that we were producing at any time. A lot of times we could tell you what the cycle was going to be before our customers could, because we tracked it at a more in-depth level than they did, just to flex our manpower so that we weren't bringing on too many people or not enough.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's incredible. I work with a lot of manufacturers, and some of them really have their ducks in a row when it comes to ERPs and tracking systems. A lot of them, it really isn't tracked. We're doing marketing for a lot of these customers, and I'm saying, hey, can you give me an idea of how many leads you were getting a year ago, just so we can kind of do a side-by-side comparison? They're like, well, I don't know. I'll have to go back through my emails. So what are the technological and physical steps that you would take to go from maybe that position where you're literally tracking nothing other than the bank account to, what's the first most important thing to track?
For me, it was sales per employee.
Okay.
Right. So that was one of the things that we really started breaking down, is how many sellable dollars did we have to employee. That helps you understand if you have too many people or not enough. And it's something that you continually ratchet up as you go through your growth. We started at $100 per person, and then $250, $350, $450, $500, just continuing to work up. And that also drove a lot of improvements in our manufacturing process. Safety is always the number one. We knew down to the hour, how long we went without a lost time. We went 3 years without a lost time. Had one lost time, and then went another year and a half. How those things happen is always questioned, sometimes. But unfortunately, that does happen, that you have those incidences. We investigated it, put in any type of controls that we needed to make sure it never happened again, and then move on from there.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of times with these sorts of incidents, I see that sometimes it's just pure stupidity, right? Like, there's a sign there that says don't do it, and you decided not to do it anyway. And it's like, how do you prevent that, right? Like, what can you possibly do? More training?
Yep. This was actually a repetitive motion. This was actually a repetitive motion injury for somebody that had been there about 4 weeks. So just nothing you can really do about that. But it also made us go back and look at our rotation schedules and our training matrices and make sure that we have plenty of people trained on each job, so we could rotate them through. That was something that was important to me, was keeping that type of analytics of who's trained where. Are we have enough people to cover? That's one thing that people don't think about. For us, it was having 3 people trained on every job all the time, so that if you had turnover, or you needed to increase productivity, you could move people around pretty seamlessly.
Right, right. Can you tell me an example of a situation where that, revenue per employee really played out, where, you could really use that information to make a business decision?
Yeah. So I actually took a contract job during the middle of running my business, and I had a gentleman that I used to work with at Toyota that had a plant that was struggling, and I was able to step away from the business. Had a couple good people in place. We were at a very stable, spot in the business, and this gave us an influx of cash flow to be able to buy a piece of machinery that we were needing. So I stepped out as the owner of the business, but I was able to continue to look at those um, measurables, especially the sales per employee. And that's one of the ones, like I said, that drove a lot. That told me how much we were selling each day. It told me, if we had the right manpower. So about 3 months into that contract job, I was watching our sales per employee drop. So I
Okay.
was able to very quickly call, get on the phone, and say, "Hey, what's going on? Walk through the business, look at the forecast, talk to the customer," and we were able to readjust our manpower to bring us back in line. We were going into a slow season, and there was 2 times a year that it kind of slowed down for about 60 days,
Right.
and the people that I had in place just weren't seeing that fast enough. But I was able to turn that, and that difference between losing money and making money at that point.
Right. So did you decide to kind of slim down the workforce and maybe assign people to a few more jobs, or what did you do?
We did. So what I've learned over the years is a lot of times if you just have a honest conversation with people and say, "Hey, for the next 60 days, we're going to be a little bit slim. We have 12 people. We need 9 people right now to keep us where we need to be."
Yeah.
One time was entering into the summer, and one time was a long time about Christmas. So actually, the employees put together a rotation where each one of them would take a half a day or take a day off and would keep us at that 9 people, and purely by just being honest with them and making sure that they understood what was going on.
Gotcha. Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, I definitely see how that can be a valuable metric. So what do you use to physically track metrics like, revenue per employee, or, how productive given machines are? Like, what are the physical tools that you're using to do that?
So honestly, there's a lot of costly programs out there. We actually did it on Excel. As we grew, we were not going to be able to do that. But one of the things I've seen a lot of companies waste money on is going out and getting products and not really understanding what they need. Spend $8,000 or $10,000 on a tracking program, and until you really go through and manually do it and understand what really drives the business, you're just the potential of wasting money is very high. So we tracked it through Excel. We understood what we needed, and then we worked with a company to build a business analytics program that was still, I'll say, Excel based, but had where we can enter information into a database, and then it would populate out into Excel charts and stuff for us. So I call it trailer parking. We trailer parked it at first, make sure what we needed, and then got a little more advanced to make sure we weren't wasting our money.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So now that you're in a much larger company, managing four divisions, one of the largest magnetics producers in the country, what sort of technology, does a company like that use to track? Whatever you can tell me.
Yeah, so we have a homegrown system that is a database that tracks everything from our sales incoming to where we're at producing, people, time, defects. I mean, what we have here is it is far superior to what 2012 Toyota had. We track everything down to the nth detail. There is not anything that I can't pull up and find a record of.
Wow. With all the products on the market for analytics and tracking, I guess what makes the decision to develop your own, kind of in-house system versus buy something off the shelf?
Most of the stuff that you buy off the shelf, there is a lot of back door programming that you have to do, or background programming you have to do. So you end up, to get what you really need, you end up spending several thousands of dollars, if not tens of thousands of dollars, to build out that system. So a
Right.
lot of people will find some sort of, I won't say lower level database, but maybe not as high speed a database that they can put the information into, and then build the front part of the data analytics to be able to give them what they want. And by the time you keep going back to the provider to do the programming for you, it's really just as cheap to buy a programmer, keep them on staff, and make the changes as you go, versus either paying a lot each time or batching up and then waiting 3 or 4 months to have all the changes you want to make and shove them in. It's just way easier to have somebody on staff doing it.
Gotcha. So if you're maybe a 3, 4, $5 million contract manufacturer, maybe a fabrication shop, machine shop, have you had enough of a view of the market, what programs are available, from the Excel spreadsheet all the way up to maybe some intermediate steps? Are there some technology recommendations that you could make to those types of guys that aren't really doing much tracking?
Microsoft has several good ERP systems out there. They have 3 or 4 different choices for a company of that size. We used Fishbowl, which was an add-on to QuickBooks, and it
Okay.
gives you some analytics that you can get into. It's more of a straight up ERP system. Whereas when you start getting into the Microsoft products, you really start getting to do some add-on applications as you go, to where you can start off a little cheaper in the beginning and then add a module, add a module, add a module as your business grows and you need more of those analytics that you didn't need in the beginning.
Gotcha. So, if you had to sell implementing this type of a process to one of those, example manufacturers, what's the biggest reason to do it? Would it be increased profitability? Avoiding the loss of revenue? What's the biggest deliverable there?
It's understanding your business, and right, how do you make any decision in your business if you really don't understand it? I think people even avoid looking at their P&L half the time, as long as there's money in the bank,
Right.
the really understanding, because it's a really hard decision when you get in there and look and see that, hey, your favorite customer that you like dealing with is actually losing money. We jumped into
Right.
rotomolding for about 12 months, right as COVID was starting. We bought 2 used machines and put them in February before COVID hit in March, and went through that next year and liked it, hired a bunch of people, had worked in that discipline before, manufacturing discipline before. But when we really sat down and were honest with ourselves, at best we were breaking even.
Yep.
And what we realized is we bought 2 smaller machines, we bought 2 older machines, and we did that through the analytics. We tracked how much maintenance downtime we were having, how much money we were spending out on it, how much sales effort it was going out and finding work for it,
Yep.
just all the above, right? The efficiencies all the way around. So it just, without those inputs, I just don't know how you make a decision. You're shooting in the dark.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, in kind of making that jump, so I'm the kind of person, like I'm a creative person. I'm entrepreneurial. I'm certainly not detail oriented. And so for me to implement systems or use systems like this is very difficult, because like I don't even know what I would look at. The information I look at on a daily basis of my business is, okay, that piece of content that I generated last month, how much traffic am I getting from it? Have I got any leads from it? But the whole idea of tracking a customer, knowing exactly what that customer is costing you in terms of employee resources, your own time, that information is valuable. So, for that fabrication shop owner that is in the business every day, is maybe running a machine from time to time, what information does he really need to look at? Like, what is the must have, the bare minimum information he absolutely needs to be looking at?
I think it has to be your net income, right? And by job, right? How much money did you put out to buy the raw materials? How much time did you have invested into it? What's your overhead? And look,
Yep.
I'm just like any other entrepreneur. Squirrel, I'm over here. What's the next shiny thing? There are so many opportunities to have partial employed people anymore, remote people that can
Yep.
take and feed your information in 3 times quicker than you can do it, probably 10 times quicker than what you can do it, that
Yep.
enjoy that side of things. And I'm just getting an output. My business jumped hugely forward and we were able to grow double in 1 year. We went from 1 million to 2 million in 1 year by hiring a office manager and
Wow.
just to handle paying the bills, recording the data, creating the charts. I could go
Yep.
in 15 minutes, look at all the charts, understand where we were at, make a decision right on the fly, and go back to what I was doing, building the business from a floor side.
Yep.
Fractional CFOs, when we started really getting in the 2 million mark, I hired a fractional CFO, you know, uh, 16 hours a month. Was it cheap? No, but it was fraction of obviously the cost of a CFO being there all the time. But we
Right.
were able to build out future models, right? So having the data, and the only way we could build out those future models was having the data that we built in those databases and saying, hey, here's what it looked like at 500,000, a million. Here's the cost. Here's all of our breakdown on our utilities, consumables, and that CFO was able to take that and build out a model that let us go get a $200,000 loan to start buying equipment to make that next jump. Now,
Yep.
unfortunately, I sold the business before we brought in the new machinery. The new owner is taking care of that, but because we had all of that, that was a 3 month process instead of probably going back and taking a year to try and dig all that stuff out, convince a bank. We were able to show a 5 year model of what it looked like, you know,
Right.
before and after that modeling and bringing in those machines.
Right. Yeah, yeah, and of course, if you're looking at getting that investment or getting a loan or anything to that effect, you need that information. So, at Magnum Magnetics, what is kind of the scope of your responsibility there? What does your day to day look like?
So I'm over 3 plant managers, and they're really dealing with the day to day on the floor. Are we getting magnet tapes and films, those things out the door? Really, what I'm looking at is what direction are we going next? Either by working with our engineers and maintenance guys to look at the level of our equipment, how old is it?
Yep.
Where are we at in the life cycle of PLCs? Do we need to upgrade? Taking a look at each one of our business segments and where is one lagging or growing, and understanding what resources we need to put towards those. It's
Mhm.
really trying to have a vision of where we need to be in the next 3 years
Right.
and what resources do we need to deploy to be able to do that.
Right. So, what is your kind of growth plan? What kind of markets are you looking towards, and how do you go about getting in front of them?
Um, the being the market leader, it's really protecting your position right now.
Sure.
It's more about playing defense and understanding where the market's going. Um, just relating back to my business, really you're looking at where is the growth of the industry going. So when
Right.
we were doing the manufacturing with the labor only, we had to understand what markets were growing and try and go in and find those mid-sized companies that have all the space that they can do without building another building, struggling to get people, and going in and finding those things that they couldn't automate, but staying ahead of the curve, right? Um, that's really just understanding where the market's going.
Right. Yeah, I mean, obviously, that's an interesting topic today. A lot of uncertainty in the world, a lot of uncertainty in the market, and political situation, economic. How do you factor some of the very crazy things that have happened lately into into your thoughts about the future of the business? How you're gonna create a sense of stability, and how do you respond to the economic situation?
Well, I mean, money is expensive, right? So making the right moves and really understanding through data, what do you do well at? What is lagging? Those things you're doing well at, investing into it. If you're bringing things in from overseas, it's a given that you're going to have to at points is really understanding what the cost of containers are. Back during COVID, they went from $6,000 to $45,000. So being able to maximize loads and understanding how to cube out instead of just saying, yeah, throw this on the water. You're really cubing out a container to make sure you're getting all your bang for your buck.
Right,
Even going to floor stacking, which means it's not on a pallet, it's individually stacked into the container so that you can get more pieces and parts in
okay,
to be able to make sure that every square inch of that container is used. Um, Even going back and understanding the cycle of your utilities, right? We all know that in the wintertime, gas is up. Electric doesn't go down during that time. You're still running the same amount of machines. So that would tell you that in your summer months, you have a little bit more money to spend, on, upgrading something because your gas bill went down to $100 instead of being $500 through the wintertime, right? That gives you an
right,
extra $400 a month to be able to inject in some, like what we used it for is during that time, we upgraded to tablets to be able to start doing our quality checks.
okay,
So each month we would buy a couple tablets, put on each one of the stations, and then we could do our quality checks and have it electronically recorded instead of paying somebody to sit there and type that information in, after you turn in the sheets.
right, right. So, what is the biggest economic factor right now that's having an influence on your business? Would that be the cost of money more than anything?
Cost of money more than anything.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, Patrick David talks about zombie companies, and you're really starting to see it.
I
You're
love
really
the
going to
guy.
start seeing a lot more companies fail that were able to go out and refinance money when it was 1%, 3%, and keep
Yep.
rolling that over. But when you get 8, 9, 10%, it's a lot harder to do that. Your
Right.
cost of capital is huge.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I just actually listened to your next five moves on Audible. I actually listened to it a couple times through. I've always found that when you listen to a book while you're driving, you don't put your full attention towards it, and you just need to keep listening to it till you actually absorb the information. I'm such a big fan of like picking up a book, reading it, taking notes, highlighting things. That's just like the best way to do it.
If you get a chance, read his next one. Choose Your Enemies Wisely, just as good as the
Okay.
first one. So,
Okay. Yeah. Great guy.
yeah.
Yeah, so that's cool that you're into reading. I love this topic. I mean, I'm a huge fan of books. I mean, you can see I got some on my back shelf here, but yeah, I'm constantly reading books. Right now I'm reading some of Tim Ferriss's stuff.
Yep.
Tim Ferriss?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so he's got a Tribe of Mentors, which was an excellent book, where he's talking, he's interviewed, I don't know if it was hundreds or 100 kind of asking the same questions, but you know, basically just asking more or less trying to transfer the knowledge from all of these mentors to people that would actually never get to talk to them. So it's really really cool concept.
Yep.
But
Yeah, for me, it's John Maxwell. Like when I have younger guys come in, or less experienced guys, I shouldn't say younger, but less experienced guys coming into the supervision, John Maxwell is a good go-to. I think he
yep,
lays it out to where, especially if you have somebody that's a little more aggressive and wanting to make things happen, I think he does a great job of teaching people how to, take a deep breath, present it correctly. Right now I'm reading a maintenance management book, how to put in planning and forecasting in your maintenance.
yep,
We do a great job with that. Most companies do a great job forecasting their production, but when it comes to maintenance, even though you may have TPMs and PMs and all that stuff, but really forecasting your maintenance, no different than what your production is. It just gets
right,
back to data again, right? How much data can you feed into it? Changing over to from time based PMs. Like every 3 months we're going to do this. Well, what happens if your production doubles, right? And if you
okay,
don't understand that now you're running 50,000 pieces through when you were only running 10,000 pieces through, that 3 months doesn't make sense anymore. So then you're kind of
right,
back into the crash and burn because your PMs don't work. So
wow,
really just understanding it. So data is all a part of everything you do in manufacturing, right? You just can't get away from it.
right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I've seen some pretty impressive shops over the years. Usually, the aerospace shops are really the most high tech for the most part when it comes to data. Like, I walked into one kind of in our local area here, and they have like this big control room. Yeah, I mean, there's these giant TVs with all these different data streams coming in, and it's just amazing. And then you go to a little mom and pop shop, and you see they have a notebook.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
it's crazy to see the variation.
But one of the things, we were talking about reading, just jumping back for a second, the 4 hour work week, I read
Yeah,
that book, right? And it makes you take a different look at it. 20 years, for probably 80% of that 20 years working 7 days a week, 12 to 15 hours a day. And then, you start to get older, and you just can't sustain that anymore. Not that it was smart to do it back then, but you have the stamina. So really starting to, not just always looking at, books and things that tell you to go all out all the time, but really balancing that with stuff that tell you, hey, there's other things in life. You need to balance this. It really makes sense not to just drive and not pay attention to what's going on around you too.
right. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I have a couple month old boy, and I have a 3.5-year-old girl, and a wife, and a property, and it's just you really start to realize after a while that the chase for money and the chase for success. I mean, you're always going to have it. I have it. I want to become more successful every day and become better at what I do and get more customers and become more profitable. But, it is a question of what are you going to sacrifice for that? And is it worth it?
Most of the time, no. So,
Right.
but I think people need to look at on that side of things is, was I any happier at 100,000 than I was at 50,000? The toys
Yeah.
were bigger, the houses were bigger, the cars were newer, but what did I really accomplish, and why am I doing it? And that's when I came back into the workforce from selling my business. That was the most important thing, is what was going to give me satisfaction. It wasn't
Right.
about the paycheck. It wasn't about the benefits and the perks and stuff like that. It was, what did I learn from the first time around? What did I learn from my business? And what I learned from myself was the teaching aspect, right? Is
Okay.
protecting people from themselves, teaching them how to be more efficient, more effective.
Yeah.
Because once you get past that 10-hour mark, you're absolutely not effective, right? You're
Right.
tired, you're grouchier, right? And you lose the respect of the people around you. You can do things perfect for 6 months, lose your temper one time, and you've destroyed everything you did for the previous 6 months, right? And then
Absolutely.
it takes a year to build that back, right?
Right.
So being effective, understanding what needs to happen, having good data around you through your analytics to make good decisions allows you to work 8, 9 hours at a maximum and be more effective than, over a 4 day period than it does 7 days at, 20 hours a week or 20 hours a day. So,
I completely agree. Yeah, my sister's actually a medical doctor, and she did her residency, and then she's doing a fellowship right now. And it just shocks me the hours that they demand of these. She's beyond a student now. I mean, she's actually fully in place doctor, but just the incredible hours. And it's like, how can these people be efficient and be really good at their jobs when they're sleep deprived and
yeah.
grouchy? It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, some of the most important professions out there, doctors, policemen, firemen, they're on 48-hour shifts, right?
Yeah.
What happens at the end of that, 46 hour, and then an emergency happens. It always struck me as odd that those are the professions that we have that long of shifts for. If anything, you would think it would be the reverse, right?
The most life critical
Yeah.
ones are the
Yeah.
most sleep deprived. It makes no sense whatsoever.
You know,
So how do you? I mean, I guess, so do you have family? You have kids?
yeah, so my kids are on the opposite end of yours. I've got a 28, 25, and a 22-year-old. The youngest one just
Okay.
graduated from Tiffany University. Um,
Okay.
so one grandchild, so just turned a year old. Uh,
Congratulations. That's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah, makes you feel really appreciative, but really old when that first grandchild comes.
Yeah, I hear you. I stumbled across an interview you did elsewhere, and it was kind of on the topic of faith, and it sounds like faith is an important part of your personal life and integrated into your business. Just kind of curious, like how does faith play into your role in a business environment?
Oh, buddy. I mean, especially when you have your own business. I mean, in everywhere, but your own business. I mean, I can't tell you how many times God protected me, or, we would leave on a Friday afternoon and have $500 in the bank, and, payrolls due that it comes out on Wednesday, and it's, $4,000. You got 500 in the bank on Friday. And you're just praying all weekend that everybody pays their POs or their invoices on time, because that's the only way you're going to make payroll. And for me, that was the main thing. If I can make payroll, we can figure out everything else after that. But so many times that God and my dad, pulled me through. Talk to them both, and just have that support. I mean, there's nothing like it. So I mean, it's to build something from $15,000 cash to a $2.5 million business, you don't do it alone, right?
Right.
And there's nothing more lonely than being a entrepreneur, because most of the time your family doesn't understand. They're supportive, but they really don't understand. You're 100 miles an hour, so you're driving home, and then that's when it really hits you. And when you can, just talk to God and look for how to move through that next thing. I mean, it's all the support you need. But like I said, my family, my dad, my mom, my brother, I'll tell you real quick, we were really starting to get pretty big into the sorting, quality sorting for tier one automotives, and our largest opportunity came along, and it was adding 20 people, but it was a 90-day net. And we had before then operating off 15 to 30-day net terms.
Yep.
And, I called my dad up and I said, "Hey, Dad, need to talk through with you, and told him the situation. And he goes, "Well, how much money would it take to make this work?" And I said, "Well, I said, I've got to go get an investor, probably 50,000. And he goes, "Well, it'll probably take me 2 days to be able to get it pulled out of my retirement." My dad showed up with a sack of cash and financed the business, and he wasn't that far away from retirement. If that got lost, there was no way to make that up in the amount of time he had. Right.
Yeah.
And so, just having that faith, and, then the prayer was to God, say, "Hey, I can't lose Dad's money. This is important." And within 18 months, through the middle of COVID, we paid that back all cash back to him within 18 months, even through COVID. So,
yeah. Wow. That's awesome. And I mean, I can tell you very similar stories about my business. I'll tell you, I've always felt like God was on my side with the business. There's been a lot of times where I've kind of stressed out about, hey, we're not getting a lot of business right now. What's going to happen? And I'll tell you what, it always comes through. You always get what you need. Maybe not as fast as you want to grow, and maybe not as much money as you want, but it always seems to work out. And I think, if you're the kind of person, which sounds like you are, that does the right thing, you treat people fairly, you treat your customers right, treat your employees with respect, and put their interests first. I think things do work out.
Yeah. And, the most important thing is picking the right partners, right? And there's no other one than God. But, concept manufacturing probably could have been 4 times the size it was, but we weren't willing to, we were only willing to partner with people that wanted to be a true partner. Right.
Right.
Wooster Brush, for example, I don't think there's a better company out there to work with. We were able to call up, have conversations. We were 2 miles from their shop. They would show up at any time. We would work through things. It was their equipment. They would, if something was going on, they would come over. We would walk through it. Just no better partner. And that's what really made a great business. Like I said, it could have been a lot bigger, but it would have been a lot more hassles, chasing money, bad partners, leaving you hanging. I did that one time, and right at the beginning of COVID, and when we were about $300,000 in sales, and had a company I won't say they stuck us, but they left us hanging with about $100,000 out in
Yep.
invoices. And when you're that
Yep.
size, that could be detrimental, right? And
Yeah,
you
that's
know, just a
huge.
lot of prayers and a lot of faith and trust, and it worked out. But that really taught me that yes, you can grow really fast, but if you pick the wrong partners, it can come all crashing down very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's a huge lesson, and fortunately, in my business where you're kind of delivering digital goods, you're kind of getting paid as you go.
Yep.
Not as much risk. We haven't got too many bad situations, but when you're manufacturing and you got to buy the materials and you got to do the labor and
Yep.
build the tooling and all that kind of stuff, a lot of times before you get the full payment, man, that's
Yes, sir. Yep.
yeah, you can get hit pretty hard pretty fast, boy.
One thing that we haven't touched on is debriefing, and I think that's a really overlooked part of business. Um, you're like the Blue Angels, for example, right? One of the main things that they do after a flight and stuff is come back and debrief on, how did it go? What mistakes did we see? Where did this go right? Where did it go wrong? And I think that's
Right.
one thing in business that people really don't take time to really set
Yep.
down and understand is what's going right and what's going wrong. So really building in that time, everybody's on the forefront of it and driving, but really stepping back to take that time. So like on Thursday afternoons, we worked 410. So Thursday afternoon, really tried to step back for at least an hour and reflect. How did the week go? Where did we see things that we really screwed up on, and where we needed to move forward on. So that would be one main thing I would say is that reflection time, that debrief with your group to really understand where we're at.
I think that's a great point. Yeah, in the Marine Corps, I was in the Marines for 4 years. We would always, every time you had an op, you do an after action report.
Yeah.
Everybody talk about what went right, what went wrong, and how you're going to do better next time. So yeah, it's a great point. Yeah. And so how do you plan that? Like, how quickly after is it after the final part shipped out? When you actually integrate that debriefing into the process?
So because ours was continuous, it really was just a review of the week, really understanding, how did the week go? Where could have things happened better? We had our daily, 15-minute meetings just to set direction and all of that, but
Yep.
really taking that time and not having everybody involved, right? We didn't pull everybody from the floor. We didn't. It was the key players, and then we could really look at what needed to be broke down. And then Monday morning, we would come back in, have an action plan. Okay, how do we make this better? Who do we involve with it? And really set the tone for the week going forward.
Yep. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I do like the topic of meetings because I feel like meetings are one of the biggest wastes of time in companies, or at least they can be.
Yep.
But I do think that they're important, and so I'm always interested to hear, from somebody like, from your perspective, who do you need to have meetings with, how often, and how do you integrate the perspectives of people that are a little bit further down the food chain? Maybe that you have managers in charge of, but you still kind of want to hear from them from time to time. Like, how do you incorporate that into your meeting schedule?
For me, I hate meetings with a passion, right?
Yeah.
Most meetings are ineffective. So when we're going to have a meeting, it's a specific topic, only the people that are intimately involved with it and making plans and moving forward, and report out meetings, right? Working meetings need to happen at a working level. Once you get into a manager level and above, they're report out meetings, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, absolute most. Here's where we're at. This is where we're moving. What help do you need? And then move on to the next thing. But for me, every morning I come in at about 6:30, 6:45. I hit the floor because that's basically shift change. And I'm out there, asking people, hey, how'd your weekend, like this morning, how'd your weekend go? Go fishing this weekend, and build that rapport with them, right?
Right. Yep.
I worked in Mississippi for about 4 years with Johnson Controls, and coming out of the northern states and going down there, I was used to just saying, hey, go do this, or we need to get this done today.
Yep.
And that had a very disrespectful reaction down there. And so it taught me that taking that 10 seconds of niceness. Hey, how's Susie doing? Is she doing good in baton or whatever, Johnny
Right.
in football, whatever it is, you make that connection, hey, can you please do that for me? I mean, it has a much bigger impact. So taught me very early on in my career, that would have been in 98, 99, that getting that connection gets a lot farther than just giving direction, right?
I
So
agree.
once they understand you, you understand them as a person, or at least care that they're a person. A lot of information comes flowing because they want their life to be better here, right? They want everything to flow smoothly, so they're going to tell you when they know you care.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. And that was something I struggled with coming out of the military. Because I was a non-commissioned officer, so I had some guys under me, and I was very much used to just the go do this, go do that. We need to get this done now, just like you said. And boy, dealing with millennials fresh out of college or whatever the next generation is, they did not like that approach very much, and so I had to learn pretty quickly. You have to build that rapport, and it certainly, even 20, 30 years ago in the workforce, there was very much that sense of I'm the boss, you do what I say kind of thing, but it just doesn't work anymore.
Right. Self-directed workforces, that used to be a big thing. But unfortunately, I think one of the main things we're lacking in our workforce today is critical thinking, right? Critical problem
Mm-hmm.
solving. If you tell
Right.
people that A, B, C, and D, is supposed to happen, and you get to A, B, and then D pops up, and then C, it's kind of a catastrophic thing where you
Blows
used to
your
be, you
mind.
just thought through that, right?
Right.
So I think one of the big things nowadays is understanding that, and really it's going to fall under the ownership of the companies to teach that critical thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if we don't start putting those things in place, and that's one of the things I'm really focusing on here, is how do we create that critical thinking path for people and teach them how to do it. Then you're adding cost in by adding layers of management and putting in more electronics to make decisions or keep people from making bad decisions. Whereas, 20 years ago, we didn't need that, right?
Right.
So building out those critical thinking points and understanding, and this is why we make that decision and how we make that decision, that's very important in today's workforce.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I like the way that you worded it too, because I have these conversations a lot about what's the problem with with kids today. What's the what's the problem with the workforce? But I think that critical thinking is a huge part of it. Growing up for me, my dad was a general contractor, and I remember as a very young child sitting there cleaning pipe fittings as he's using the torch, and if I didn't have the right one when he was ready for it, I was going to hear about it. But
Yep.
that's great because you're anticipating the need and you're thinking through it, and I think you can apply that to pretty much every area of life, but most kids just don't get that.
Yep.
So I think the big question is how do you provide that training? Is there an online course that can help? Does it have to be more application or company specific?
Yeah.
I mean, how can you train people on these basic analytical thinking skills?
It's a great question. I don't have all the answers on that, but what I can tell you is it's more of a personal approach right now. It's really teaching your supervisors because they're all in that age group now, to where they didn't get taught critical thinking like we did, problem solving. So once you get that supervisor up to where they're making good decisions and being able to move around that, then they're taking their team leaders, 3 team leaders, and teaching them how to do it. And it's just continuing down and teaching people why it's important and how it moves forward. Um, you know, uh, it's getting that buy-in. You just don't see buy-in anymore. Companies pay basically the same money. They're basically a lot of the same way. So a lot of times people just get upset, and it's like, you know what? I'm moving down to the next place because the pay is no different. Benefits are basically the same. Maybe you're making 50 cents more, 50 cents less, but it's just a start over. And it's understanding how do we keep those people, keep them engaged, and understanding how it moves it forward. And if you're with a good company, or you have a company and you can show those people how it benefits them monetarily, better systems, whatever it is, then there's more buy-in. And I think that's one thing that we've lost is we just decided that people should do it because and not because how this affects you and how we move forward together.
Right. Yeah.
That's
You
one thing.
can't do
That's
that.
one thing. That's one thing I tell you. Magnum Magnetics does great is involving our people. They understand where we're at. They understand what we're trying to do. Where's the direction of the company going? They share more information than any company I've ever been with, uh, financial wise, direction wise. Than great company from that side of things, from many sides, but that's one specific.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I agree. That's something you learn as a parent too, is you get much better results, in terms of obedience, if you can give a good reason why,
Yep.
and I always try to take that approach, with my child, as young as she is. I think you can still, now I think parents can take this too far, as
Yep.
I'm sure employers can, where you don't need to explain your every little decision to your
Yep.
kids, but sometimes it is helpful to say, this is what's good for you because of X, Y, or Z. So yeah, I can definitely agree with that.
Well, and
So
I think we're too quick to give answers too, right? You got to make people struggle a little bit with an answer too, right? Question, when they come up and say, "Oh, this isn't working." Why is it not working? What would you do, right? And making them think
right,
through that, 'cause they're so used to the answer being right there or being able to Google it. I mean, you can Google everything. Unfortunately, not from a manufacturing standpoint when it's in the moment, right? So really
right,
pushing back that people make decisions and that they're thinking through a critical path. I think that's more important than anything, right? Is just not getting frustrated and giving the answer and walking away.
right. Yeah, that's a great point. So, I'm sure from the reading that you've done and some of the intersection points with some of the reading I've done, I'm sure that you realize that, a defensive marketplace position in terms of a long-term strategy is not really the answer if you want growth.
Yep.
So can you give me a little bit of insight into maybe some proactive strategies that you're looking at for maybe developing a new market or use for your product, or maybe internationally looking at some awakening markets? Just give me an idea of kind of what you're thinking in terms of growth.
Um, Well, let's go back to concept manufacturing for a little bit. My business, it's the vertical
Sure.
integration, right? So when we first started out, we were buying custom made crates to ship some of the product in.
Right.
And was it easy? Yes. And yes, we sold it to the customer and there was a markup on it. But what we quickly realized is that if we took 1 day per week and just built the crates that we needed for shipping out on Thursday, we were able to buy in a larger quantity of materials, get the cost down, utilize labor that was trapped in some of our processes to build them. We weren't spending out any more labor, and we were able to get a higher profit margin off of it. So really,
Interesting.
it's understanding where you can vertically integrate things into that makes sense. There's some things that don't, but there are those that do. Looking at other lines of revenue that are adjacent to what you're doing. We started out doing sorting and rework, and so we had to have a warehouse. We may only use that warehouse once every 3 months, but you weren't a real company until you had a warehouse, right? So
Right.
then we
Right.
started looking down to 3PL, right? Because a lot of the stuff that we're bringing in for sorting was also repack. Sorry about that. Was repack. So then we started getting into some of the 3PL stuff during COVID and started repacking from our experience of doing that. So that's what really got us through COVID was that 3PL repacking, bringing stuff in off the ocean containers that was floor stacked, palletizing them into part numbers, and then when orders would come in, we'd stack it out and move it on. So it's understanding what you already have some capability in, building out on that.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. There's always that challenge too, though, of not, just the unknown. So you've never done that portion of it before. You think that there could be profit there, how do you choose? Like, how do you say, yes, I'm going to go for that? And, even if it costs some investment, what makes you kind of jump off the ledge there? Because I think a lot of people stay in their lane and they keep doing that forever because it's just the easy choice, right? I mean, inertia is the easy choice.
Look, I'm one of those people, jump and build wings on the way down, right? I mean, I didn't have, I'm not saying it was smart, but I didn't have a business plan. I didn't have anything. I had always wanted a business. I just jumped out there and, educated, risk, right? Understanding where you're at with your money, what resources you have, but sooner or later, you just have to jump out there. And, there's an opportunity to fail hugely, but for short periods of time, you can outwork about anything, right? And get the right resources pulled in place. That was one thing I really learned is you just have to move, and you can't be afraid to say you were wrong, right? I was absolutely wrong with the rotomolding stuff, even though it worked out. We could have lost a huge amount of money doing that, but it was also being honest with ourselves and pivoting when we needed to. There was 4 main times, especially because of COVID, that we had to pivot our business model and move to be able to stay alive as an organization. And I think that's one of the big things is understanding when it's time to move, right? And it's all done by data and analytics. I mean, I know I keep coming back to that, but if you don't understand your business, you don't understand where you're at with money, you don't understand the skills of your people, it's very difficult. You're really just taking risk instead of an educated risk.
Yeah. And so do you recommend, that somebody start with a consultant, if they're not paying attention to their data and analytics, or do you think they just kind of go shopping online, find one of those Microsoft products and decide which one's best? Like what would be the step you'd take to learn?
First off, I would do it manually, right? What do I want to record, right? And understand what's driving the business. And it's little things like sales per employee was first. And then, how much labor do I have into it? And then, how much of this part do I have on hand? And once you get those basic things, then it's great to find a consultant to say, hey, these are things I want to track. Give me some options of programs out there that I can utilize to do this.
Yeah.
So I hate to plug any one company, but like Dynamic 365, that was a great one because of all the modules you could add on. Not only was it an ERP system, but you could do floor manufacturing tracking, some of those other things. And they had different modules that was geared towards different types of manufacturing. Whereas a lot of them are just, a hair salon. And this is just for products going down an assembly line or a job shop. There's some that split those and are very versatile. It's just really understanding what's out there. Actually, Huntington Bank did a great job of helping me look through some of that stuff. Rain Associates, our accounting firm, they had a business analytics person we were able to work with. So even within the people that you deal with already, there's a lot of resources out there that you don't know that are out there. Like when I sold the business, Huntington Bank made sure that I understood that, hey, we have a whole section that helps you understand how to sell your business the right way so you don't get killed on taxes, or how to invest this. And it was free to me, so there's a lot of things that we don't look into that are probably out there free or low cost with partners that we're already using.
Right. Yeah, that's great advice. I mean, I think that gives someone a step-by-step kind of idea of where to get started and what to think about. Well, I'd be remiss in not covering the topic, because we did talk about it a little bit in our preliminary conversation. The role that, I guess in your own company, that the website marketing, digital kind of played in your growth, establishing the legitimacy for your company. Just give me your perspective on, the internet as a way to generate new business.
I didn't utilize it enough. It's not something I had a comfort level of. I'm a floor manufacturing guy, started off on the floor, worked my way up through. So those things, I didn't utilize probably as much. We got a website because somebody asked one time, hey, do you have a website? Oh, well, no, we can't let you have it because you can't check this box. So we went out and got a website, right? Yeah, just to
Yep.
show that we were actually a company. But as we started moving into 2023, uh, we got with a marketing firm, local marketing firm, Brian Media out of Medina, Ohio. And we started doing some little blogs and started doing some LinkedIn marketing and going out there. It was amazing how fast just little blurps, pictures of the facility and we care about our people, or safety is number one. We really want to be a partner. Just little blurbs like that with a little detail behind them. How quickly our following started, exploding. Uh, every day it seemed like we had two or three people, linking in with us and trying to understand what we were doing. So
Hmm.
I would say that as much as having a plan for how you're going to use your finances is how you're going to market, how you're going to get yourself out there and understand the best avenues to do that. And it doesn't
Yeah.
cost a ton of money, right? I mean, there's some low cost ways out there. And a lot of our community colleges have certificate programs or just even classes that you can at least get an understanding of what's out there, and that helps you pick the right people to work with.
Yeah. Yeah, it is so important. I mean, and it's one of those investments too. Like I see companies, they'll buy, $1 million piece of equipment, but then they won't spend 10 grand to make sure that that equipment stays running. And
Right.
I've seen so much power out of, building a good website that clearly presents what you offer, that has good information, that contains keywords that people would search for to find your business. Just those basic steps can make all the difference in the world between, oh, I gotta, make cold calls to try to generate new business, or do, many, many hours of networking or whatever it is, from that to, oh, I just got a lead in today from the web, oh, I got a lead
Right.
in last week from the web. So, just that trickle of leads can make all the difference in the world when it comes to, a sustainable business model.
Absolutely. Like I said, I didn't put it at a high enough priority early into the business, and we would have been a lot farther ahead of maybe not getting business, but connecting with people and
Yeah.
letting them understand what we did and what we were trying to accomplish. And that wasn't always about making money; it was about making relationships and being there to help out when people needed something. Right? Like I
Right.
said, it's not always about the dollar. So.
Yep. Yep. So just one last question here. So what's next for you? I mean, I know that you're enjoying your current role. I know that you're an entrepreneur at heart. And so, probably at some point you might look to start something new. What would you do?
It's hard to get out of the manufacturing. Part of what we did with the concept manufacturing when we were first doing our own sorting and rework is I started MRB Services, which was a temp company, and I was paying an unreasonable amount of markup because I was new in the business and nobody knew who we were. We had no credit. So I decided that I would just start my own temp company and supply my own. So hired a couple young ladies and we built out our own. And next thing I knew, we had three companies that we were replacing people with. So I don't know if I'll relook at that at some point.
Okay.
Um, I scuttled that when manufacturing picked up because obviously that's my first love. So may look down that path. Tube bending, love tube bending. I can sit there, like a child, with a sucker watching a tube bender run all day. Just one of those things that amaze me. So.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, there's a huge call for it. I mean, there's a lot of manufacturers that still struggle to find the right employees,
Yep.
and almost having like, I guess when you think of temps, you kind of think of somebody that's kind of, just a pretty low level sort of, you can't really give them a ton of responsibility without a ton of training. But if you had kind of a higher level of, CNC programmers, or, just people that really know their stuff, and they're going to come at a higher price, but at least you know that you don't have to hire somebody full time, almost like a fractional, like the fractional CFO sort of situation.
We had a little different business model, and I get hopefully I'm not shooting myself in the foot by kind of throwing this out there, but we actually, because I'm never looking to make $1 million for myself. I comfortable living wage, something fun I want to do, but we actually gave guarantees within an area. So if somebody, had a certain wage amount that they were paying, and they could guarantee us 8 to 10 people, they had an exclusive in that area. Depending on if it was rural or urban, would be the size. So somewhere rural, we tell them you have a 5 mile radius that we won't place anybody for anybody else. You are our customer.
Oh, wow.
And,
Wow.
because what I don't think most companies really think through is you're competing against the other companies that temporary agency is working with, right? So if you
Right.
pay 50 cents less than another person, they're going to fill those openings for the people that pay more, because that's how they generate money, is off that markup.
Right.
And so we would go in with an exclusive and say, hey, you're our people. This is who we work with. So that really let us focus in on a certain type of employee that company needed. It let us have better questions, better background checks, better, looking at what they've done in the past,
Yep.
and fitting them with the right people. Again, if you're not looking, I was never looking to have a 10 or $15 million business. It was more of a lifestyle business that, like I said, was able to provide a good service to people, and that felt like the right way to do it.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
we were successful with it. So
Yeah, it sounds like it. And I really like that. I've never heard of that before, but it makes a ton of sense that you kind of have that exclusive relationship, at least within a radius. Of course, a lot of the manufacturers, don't necessarily care about the guy 5 miles away. I mean, they care about the guy one state over that takes a lot of their business. So yeah, I mean, there's some interesting nuances there.
Yeah,
But
because people only drive so far, right? About 15 miles, right? That's about right now, about all people are willing to drive is 15 miles. So if you lock down an area and say, I'm only, working with you in that area, then it really cuts down. So you go out the next 15 miles and say, okay, hey, that's where it locks down. That's where, again, but you're making a choice by doing that. You're going to stay a small boutique company. You're not going to be a major player in it, right? So because you just can't get enough companies coming in for that, right? By having that business model. So it's a choice, right?
Yeah, and it's, it definitely makes it, not a Me Too type company. And that's, I actually just recently read another book called, I can't remember the number, but it's The Immutable Laws of Marketing. A great book. Yeah. And, one of the things they really illustrate well were competitive advantages that you can use as an advertising platform or message that differentiate you from the competitor. And I hear in manufacturing, it's terrible. You always hear, we're, precision machine shop. Right. Well, who says that they're not, right? Like that's not a competitive advantage. So or fast turnaround, that's still, most people are going to say they do fast turnaround. So what is your real competitive advantage? And so, no, I think that's a great one for that business model. That's very cool. Well, Henry, I'm not, I really appreciate today. I know we went a little bit over, but boy, very wise man, a lot of great insights. I just love to hear about your ability to track information and why that's so important. Love to hear, the information you gave us about your management style and about meetings and how to deal with employees. And, hope we get the chance to talk some more in the future. But thank you very much for joining on Manufacturing Insiders. And the best of luck to you. And I hope you do get started on that entrepreneurial journey again at some point. And I'm sure you'll be successful.
Well, yeah, I appreciate the time. It's been a great conversation. And please reach out anytime.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, Henry. Have a good rest of your day.